insurance coverage. From a public policy standpoint, why is that?
Somebody has to pay for it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Right? If we're going to give these owners, these partners, insulation from liability, which is what we're doing, and mainly over here, but to a certain extent for this one as well. If we're going to give them the protection that a statutory form affords, there has to be some type of funds available if this entity is acting negligently. And that's why insurance is going to be required.
Because we said the entity is liable.
Exactly, because the entity is liable. That's precisely right. Because the entity is liable, so the entity needs to have insurance coverage. Because we've already insulated the owners from personal liability. So the entity has to have that insurance coverage. And we'll get more into that insurance coverage later on in the semester, but I just want to establish that right now. Okay? Any questions about partnerships at all before we move on to corporations? Okay. So corporations are a little bit of a different beast, right? When you think of a corporation, what do you think of? What comes to mind?
General Electric.
Big money, General Electric,
Walt Disney.
Coca-Cola, right? Big Fortune 500 corporations. It's a natural reaction. The vast majority of corporations held in the United States are small businesses or mid-sized businesses, okay? Small to mid-sized businesses, often family-owned. Although the Coca-Colas, the Facebooks, the Microsofts, you know, the Apples of the world are the ones that we think of. I just don't want you to get into the rut of thinking that it has to be a massively sized business, because it, in many cases, isn't. Okay? So, there are two main types of corporations that we're going to talk about. One is a C corporation, and the other is the S corporation. Let's start with the C corporation. The C corporation is really kind of more of your traditional corporate form. What is one of the biggest advantages that you can think of from listening to the lecture of a C corporation?
You can sell shares.
You can sell shares. Absolutely. As a practical matter, what does that mean?
Raise money.
You can raise money. You can raise money by selling off parts of yourself. It sounds a little sordid when I say it that way, but that's really kind of what it is. Okay? A corporation, let's call it, I'm terrible at, give me a name of a company. Make one up for me.
Just Acme. You know the one.
Oh,
Acme.
Acme. That's almost as bad as ABC. All right.
It's in cartoons all the time.
Yes. Acme Corporation, let's say, has 100 shares. Acme Corporation can sell off as many shares as it wants to people who want to invest in Acme Corporation, right? Acme Corporation is a C corporation, can decide, well, no, I'm going to hold that thought there, okay? That ability to sell off percentages of itself is the concept of fractional ownership, right? That's what a share is. If you go onto Ameritrade or TD Waterhouse or whatever, and you decide you want to buy a share of Apple, I don't know how much it's going to cost you today, maybe around $250. I don't know what the share price is. If somebody's really bored and they want to pull up the share price of Apple on their phone, go ahead. Okay. You could buy a share of Apple today for how much?
$136.
$136. It's split. That stock price must have split, because I remember it was in the fives, I think, last year. For $136, you can go onto your Ameritrade account today and go buy yourself a share of Apple, right? And you will officially be a 0.000000001% owner of Apple, okay? But you will be. You will. You will own an infinitesimally tiny, but tiny share of Apple because you bought that share, right? When we're talking about major corporations like Apple, how is that share price determined? How is the company valued?
Yes.
By the future earnings.
And this is probably an overly simplistic answer, but for today's purposes, it's not a corporate finance class, and thank goodness for that. We can say you know what it is basically?
It's what they own versus what they own.
The share price today times the number of shares. Okay? That's basically what the company's worth. That's basically what the company's valued at. So if it's trading for $136 today, and tomorrow is trading at $50, okay? Well, let's say if it was trading for $100 today, because I can't do math this well, it's trading for $100 today and it's trading for $50 tomorrow, the value of Apple just went down by 50%, okay? Yes, we can get into future earnings and assets and liabilities and futures, blah, 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 blah. We won't do that.
Yeah.
That's just a really basic analysis that I want to give you, okay? How do you determine the value of Acme, a family-owned business that is absolutely not on the New York Stock Exchange? That's a lot harder, my friends, okay? It's a lot harder. And that's really where, if you're looking to invest in a small corporation or even a medium-sized corporation, something that's not publicly traded, hasn't had an IPO, isn't on the open market, the way that you determine how much that share is worth is going to have to be through a process of determining the value of the company, corporate valuation, by looking at assets, liabilities, account receivables, payables, so on and so forth, to determine, it's a due diligence process of what that company is worth, and thus how much one share or 10 shares would be worth. Significantly more complicated when we're talking about a privately held corporation, but that's basically what it would require, this valuation of assets and liabilities. Okay, so who in a corporation is personally liable for the liabilities of the corporation? Nobody. Okay. The owners, and who are the owners of a corporation? Who owns a corporation?
The shareholder.
The shareholders, right? Shareholders. They are not personally liable for the liabilities of the corporation. You bought that share of Apple on your Ameritrade account. Can they come if Apple gets hit with some multi-trillion-dollar judgment for doing something awful? I can't even conceive of it, but are they going to come to you and say, hey, contribute towards this multi-trillion-dollar judgment that we have to satisfy? Are they? No. Okay, because you as a shareholder and owner are not personally liable for the liabilities of that corporation, right? Who is liable?
Corporation.
The corporation itself, right? So the assets, the things owned by the corporation could be lost to have to pay off a judgment, right? But they won't go to the shareholders individually, for the shareholders are not personally liable, right? Now, somebody brought this up to me once, and I do think it's a very fair statement. In what sense, though, are you affected as a shareholder if, indeed, Apple got hit with some massive, massive judgment? What might happen to Apple's shares? Down, right? Okay? So now your $100 share that you bought yesterday is only worth $50. In that sense, have you been financially affected?
Yes.
Absolutely. Okay? Your investment is no longer worth what it had been. That's not personal liability. That's not personal liability for the liabilities of the company. That's distinct. That's simply losing investment value. So just understand that distinction. Okay. In a publicly traded corporation, keep in mind that there are, generally speaking, 3 big categories of owners for you to be aware of. Who owns most publicly traded corporations? They're all shareholders, but there's specific classes that I want you to be aware of. Generally speaking, mutual funds, institutional investors, and then some individuals are, generally speaking, when we're talking about Fortune 500 type companies, publicly traded companies, those are the 3 groups that usually own most corporations.
What were the last 2?
Institutional investors, like an insurance company, perhaps. Mutual funds, doing this on behalf of retirement accounts, pension plans, IRAs, things like that. And then individual investors, okay? So those are the big 3 categories. I mean, if you were to go look, pull up any corporation, I mean, you could pull up Apple, pull up, Apple's probably a good example. You'll see who owns shares of Apple. They don't list the names of people, as far as individual owners, but you'll see that various different mutual funds will hold certain percentages of the corporation, certain companies. And then you'll see, for example, I do believe that Steve Jobs' widow is still a significant shareholder in Apple. She probably owns, 8 or 9%. I don't even know if it's that much that she owns, but she's still right. And it's probably not even in her name. I'm sure she has it in an LLC or something like that. But Lorena Jobs still owns a significant percentage of her late husband's company, and so as an individual shareholder, she actually still exerts, I think, a fairly decent amount of control. Yes.
Question. I've heard that people will create like a LLC or some sort for their personal property, like the house, the car,
Yeah.
purchase everything that way. Doesn't a company has to show they're making profit or something like that? Like I work, I have my own job, I have an income there, but I create a corporation and put my house, my car, and all this stuff under the company because of the tax benefits and all the other stuff. Is that doable? I mean, is that something that you see often, or you've heard about it?
I mean, there's a lot of different potential permutations of that. There's no requirement that an LLC has to show profit to continue to exist. I mean, I can say that. That's going to be up to their own individual owners. Could there potentially be value or a reason why somebody might want to keep assets in an LLC for liability protection purposes? Sure. I can't think of a reason off the top of my head. Usually, quite frankly, the better place to do that's a trust versus an LLC, unless they have some kind of income producing dynamic. But that didn't really answer your question, I'm sure. But
well, one of the main reasons I've heard that is because of the taxes, that you can deduct certain taxes, or you can
that's
deduct
possible.
things in taxes that you cannot do as a personal individual.
That's possible.
An individual.
Yeah. Like I said, I think that could probably also be accomplished through a trust, but yeah, there may very well it's hard for me to envision an individual tax scenario that you get a real benefit from being in an LLC. But if there are business interests, then that may come into play. So, I mean, I told you all that I got a C+ in federal income tax at Florida, right? At Florida Law School, Professor Friel, my worst grade in law school. Yeah, so I'm like the last person. The worst grade I got in law school was Professor Friel's federal income tax. He's a good man, though. Good instructor. But that means that my tax advice to you is don't take it. Up C+ range, right? Okay.
Get what you pay for.
Exactly. Hire a corporate tax attorney, don't come talk to me. Okay, so let's talk about officers and directors of a corporation. Officers and directors of a corporation have management responsibilities, right? They are who run the day-to-day business of the company. They have fiduciary duties. that they owe to the corporation. Fiduciary duties of loyalty, fiduciary duties of care. Okay? Just like we talked about in a partnership, those fiduciary duties of loyalty and fiduciary duties of care, officers and directors of a corporation have those duties to the corporation. Shareholders do not. Shareholders do not have that same duty of loyalty. So, if you own a share of Apple, you can go tomorrow and buy a share of Verizon, right? Okay, you're not violating a fiduciary duty of loyalty by owning shares in a competing business. Okay, that doesn't violate that. Okay, what is one circumstance where a corporation's owners can indeed be personally liable? It is when what is known as the corporate veil is pierced. Okay? And again, this is generally speaking going to be in smaller corporations. If a corporation is established with intent to defraud or criminal intent, the shareholders of a corporation can be found personally liable. So this is the big exception, basically. Okay. If a corporation is formed with intent to defraud or formed with criminal intent, shareholders can indeed be personally liable. Has anybody watched, is it Breaking Bad, I think? A show years ago. Okay, the guy sets up a meth lab to try to create a stream of income for his family after his demise. Okay. Lovely idea, right? But could he organize that meth lab as a corporation and hope that it's going to, spin out dividends? No. Okay? It's a criminal enterprise. Cannot use the statutory business protection forms to sell and distribute meth. Pretty basic. I mean, this is a public policy kind of argument. We're not going to give legal protections to criminal enterprises. Okay? Now, that was an extreme example, but Florida courts are very reticent to pierce the corporate veil. Okay? That's why they're pretty strict on that standard. There usually has to be criminal intent or intent forward with intent to defraud. Note a distinction. If a corporation engages in fraud, that is not necessarily enough to pierce the corporate veil, because that is different than being formed with intent to defraud, formed with criminal intent. That's some bad acts on the part of their officers and directors if the corporation engaged in fraud, and it's possible that their officers and directors will be personally liable. That's possible. But the shareholders in that scenario would not necessarily be personally liable, other than, of course, the loss of the value of the investment. But, okay, again, making that distinction with personal liability. Okay? I should note, oh, yes?
Sorry, are all these things applicable to C and S corporations?
Yes, generally speaking.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'll go over some of the distinctions with S Corp, so.
Okay, I just wanted to.
Yeah, no problem. And I'm warning everyone, I'm going to go late just tonight because, and anyone can leave when they need to leave. So I won't be upset if you need to bail out a little bit, but I want to make sure I cover all this. Where was I? Oh, other states. Okay. In states other than Florida, other states have held, just that you're aware in case you leave Florida, you're doing business outside of Florida. Other state courts have held that the improper commingling of funds between personal assets and business assets, and this is again a critical issue in smaller businesses, can be potentially the basis to pierce the corporate veil. Okay? This is common or an issue to be aware of, again, in small family-owned businesses. You own your own company, you use corporate assets to buy your wife's minivan that she uses to drive the kids around, right? I mean, it sounds kind of bad when I say that, but think about how easy that would be to do. It's a small business, it's a family business. You're using, this income that you've gained from this family business to support your family by buying a car. Okay. That's not that bad on its surface, but it could potentially be an